Welcome back. Today we're exploring a chilling case that shook Jacksonville, Florida in 1993, a story that stretches across decades and left an indelible mark on both the justice system and the hearts of those who followed it. Now, at last, her voice can be heard. In the early 1990s, Jacksonville was a growing coastal city where families flocked to modest suburban neighborhoods in search of stability and the promise of a decent life. Crime stories existed, of course, but often felt distant and unconnected to the quiet residential enclaves. The disappearance of Bonnie Haim in January of 1993 changed all that, thrusting a close-knit community into the spotlight and sparking desperate questions that would remain unanswered for more than 2 decades. This case jarred people because it occurred within an ordinary household. Bonnie, a young wife and mother, vanished without a trace, leaving behind a confused toddler, her personal belongings scattered oddly, and a suspicious trail that led nowhere obvious. The public became transfixed as investigators scrambled for clues, and the media pounced on every new development, or lack thereof. The notion that someone could simply vanish under such circumstances rattled a community that prided itself on neighborhood watch programs, tight-knit friendships, and a shared sense of safety. Over the years, as leads dried up and official searches stalled, many feared that time would bury the truth forever. Yet it would be that very passage of time that eventually brought answers. In 2014, the Haim family's former home yielded a gruesome discovery. Human remains emerged, discovered by Bonnie's own son, now grown, and determined to reclaim his past. This unexpected breakthrough catapulted the case back into the public eye. By 2019, after years of speculation, investigations, and heartbreaking testimonies, a jury found Michael Haim, Bonnie's husband, guilty of her murder. Today, this story remains a testament to the long arm of justice and the evolving techniques of forensic investigation. The Bonnie Haim case has become a modern cautionary tale, reminding us that crimes, no matter how carefully concealed, can resurface even decades later. It endures in the collective memory because it speaks to our deepest fears, how easily secrets can be buried, and how hauntingly they can return. It all began with a mild Florida winter. On January 6, 1993, Bonnie Haim, at just 23 years old, vanished. She and Michael lived in a modest home in Jacksonville's North Side area, near the Trout River. They were known to neighbors as a relatively ordinary couple. Bonnie worked at her family's business, an office supply company. Michael was a salesman who traveled frequently. They had a son, Aaron, barely 3 years old at the time, who relied on his parents for warmth and stability. That final night, some neighbors recalled muted voices, an argument simmering behind closed doors. According to one witness who chose to remain anonymous, "It sounded like anger under the surface, but I never expected something like this." No one realized then that these raised voices might have been the last sounds Bonnie would ever make. The following morning, Michael reported his wife missing, suggesting that Bonnie had left after a dispute. Yet crucial details didn't add up. Bonnie's purse turned up at a Red Roof Inn off Phillips Highway, a short drive from their home. Inside were her ID and credit cards. Investigators considered this odd placement. It looked staged, as if someone wanted to imply Bonnie ran off in haste. Her car was found abandoned near Jacksonville International Airport, but no plane tickets or travel plans emerged. With each day that passed, tension mounted. Friends and family knew Bonnie would never have left her son behind. As her parents tearfully explained later, Bonnie adored that boy. She would have never abandoned him. This was not a wandering soul in search of a new life. This was a young mother deeply connected to her child. Despite a high-profile search, no credible sightings occurred. The Jacksonville Sheriff's Office followed every lead they could in January of 1993. One by one, they interviewed neighbors, who confessed they had little to offer beyond vague recollections of a tense household. Some recalled Michael Haim acting strangely aloof in the weeks after Bonnie's disappearance. Their toddler son Aaron reportedly uttered troubling words. "Daddy hurt mommy." Such a statement, coming from a child so young, was difficult to parse. Detectives had to consider the possibility that a 3-year-old's memory might be influenced by confusion or anxiety. Nevertheless, it formed an unsettling mosaic of suspicion. In the absence of a body, theories flourished. Some believed Bonnie had run away from marital troubles, though her family refuted this vehemently. Others suspected a robbery gone wrong. A third theory, quietly whispered, was that Michael Haim had silenced his wife following a dispute over finances and custody of their son. At that time, evidence was elusive. Without physical remains or definitive forensic proof, the authorities struggled to make a case. Weeks turned into months, and as 1993 bled into 1994, leads dried up, and so did the public's immediate interest. But the family never forgot. They placed missing person flyers around Jacksonville, followed up on rumors, and pleaded for anyone to step forward with information. Their hope dimmed, but did not die. Years passed with no resolution. The once active investigation became a cold case. By the mid-2000s, technology had advanced and law enforcement techniques improved. But with no new evidence, reopening the file yielded little progress. Those who remembered Bonnie speculated privately. Meanwhile, Michael Haim built a new life elsewhere. He maintained that Bonnie had simply left, abandoning her responsibilities. It was a narrative that struck those who knew Bonnie as hollow and self-serving. Then, in 2014, the extraordinary happened. By this time, Aaron Fraser was a grown man. Adopted by a caring family after Bonnie's disappearance and removed from Michael's custody, he carried unresolved trauma and unanswered questions into adulthood. In July of that year, he gained legal rights to the old Haim family home after winning a wrongful death lawsuit against Michael. The home, now worn with age, stood as a silent witness to whatever had transpired decades before. While doing renovations, Aaron discovered something no one expected. Beneath layers of earth in the backyard, just a few feet from where he had played as a child, he unearthed fragments of a human skull. Forensic tests quickly confirmed it was Bonnie Haim. More remains soon followed, carefully recovered by forensic teams using ground-penetrating radar and meticulous excavation. The yard, once a simple suburban plot, became a grim archaeological site, revealing the final resting place of a long-lost mother. This discovery electrified the community and the media. Old case files were dusted off. Investigators who had once hit dead ends re-emerged, assisted now by modern forensic science. Detectives Robert Hinson, Sarah Coleman, and James Franklin took leading roles, painstakingly reviewing the original evidence and integrating new findings. The cause of death proved challenging to determine with certainty after so many years, but ballistic fragments found near the remains suggested a firearm had been used. Additional evidence emerged from old records and interviews. Witnesses who once spoke timidly now stepped forward more confidently, bolstered by the physical proof that Bonnie had not vanished voluntarily. During the trial in April 2019, prosecutors presented a detailed timeline. They argued that Michael had likely shot Bonnie after an argument over finances and her desire to leave their troubled marriage. Testimony from former neighbors painted a picture of quiet domestic strife. Bonnie was unhappy, said one neighbor who had spoken to her a week before she disappeared. She was trying to do it safely. Another witness, a co-worker from her family's business, explained how Bonnie planned to file for a divorce, a step Michael may not have accepted easily. The prosecution argued that Bonnie's murder was a final act of control and desperation. Michael's defense, on the other hand, remained weak. He maintained that he had no involvement, but offered no compelling alternative scenario. The crime scene that finally emerged in the backyard was both heartbreaking and telling. Experts testified that Bonnie's skeletal remains indicated a single gunshot wound to the head, consistent with homicide. The burial site was shallow, rushed. Whoever concealed the body had not chosen a location far from home. Instead, Bonnie was laid to rest just steps away from the life she had been building, indicating a killer who acted impulsively and then hastily covered his tracks. One detective described it as an unimaginably callous act, like hiding a terrible secret under your own feet. This was not the work of a cunning serial killer who left cryptic symbols or engaged in elaborate rituals. It was a tragically domestic crime, shrouded initially by a believable lie, but certain details gave the crime a unique imprint. Among the debris scattered near Bonnie's remains was a piece of fabric that matched a shirt Michael had once worn regularly. Ballistic evidence, although partially degraded, matched a weapon Michael reportedly owned and later claimed to have lost. Each piece of new evidence, no matter how small, served as a mosaic tile forming a clearer picture of that fateful night. The unusual decades-long delay in resolving the case became part of its haunting narrative. This was not an immediate whodunit solved by intrepid detectives in a matter of days. Instead, it was a slow reveal, culminating in a trial that felt like the final chapter of a long, painful book. In court, Aaron Fraser's voice, no longer a child's whisper, became a powerful instrument of truth. "I remember flashes of that night," he said. "I always felt something was wrong, and I spent years wondering if I had made it all up." His testimony, joined by physical evidence, set the tone for the jury's decision. What made this case so memorable was not only the long timeline and dramatic final discovery, but also the absence of a serial pattern or twisted calling card. Instead, the signature of the crime lay in its deceptive simplicity. Michael Haim's modus operandi seemed driven by domestic conflict, fear of losing custody, and a desperate need to maintain the appearance of normalcy. While he never communicated taunts to authorities or sought media attention, his silence spoke volumes. For decades, he lived with the knowledge that his wife's body was hidden right there, under the lawn, beneath the playground that once held their son's swing. This perverse proximity to the victim, combined with his unwavering yet dubious insistence that Bonnie had abandoned the family, served as a grim signature. It illustrated a killer who, lacking the invisibility of domestic spaces, psychologically, experts later theorized that Michael's actions reflected a man pushed to an extreme by circumstances he refused to accept. Perhaps her intention to leave him, the threat of losing control, or conflict over money. Instead of divorcing amicably, he chose to end the marriage in the most permanent way possible. In the quiet darkness of that January night, Michael became judge, jury, and executioner. His signature was one of denial and erasure. By burying Bonnie in their own backyard, he aimed to hide the truth from the world and from himself. The fact that the killer's identity remained hidden for so long, despite proximity to the crime scene, added to the case's uniqueness. It challenged the assumption that killers always strike far from their own homes or leave behind elaborate clues. Sometimes the simplest explanation, a crime concealed at the victim's home, is the hardest to prove without direct evidence. The investigation that eventually brought Michael Haim to justice was a marathon rather than a sprint. In the initial days of January 1993, the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office responded as they would to any missing person case. They interviewed Michael, canvassed the neighborhood, and searched local motels and airports. Detectives found Bonnie's purse at that Red Roof Inn, which seemed like a red herring. Technicians collected DNA samples from the home, although the technology was limited at the time. They analyzed Bonnie's bank records and phone calls, seeking evidence that she had planned to run away. Nothing indicated a secret life. The initial lead investigator, Detective Robert Hinson, grew suspicious early on, but lacked the evidence to charge anyone. His partner, Detective Sarah Coleman, who joined the team years later, would reflect that the early 1990s didn't give us the tools we have today. We relied heavily on witness statements and gut feeling. As 1993 progressed, investigators reached out to the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, FDLE, for support. They considered different angles. Had Bonnie been abducted by a stranger? Attacked after leaving the house in a hurry? They traced her credit cards, all unused after her disappearance, and checked hospitals and shelters. The case hit a wall, with little time to invest in locating the killer and identifying her attacker. the case hit a wall. They knew Michael's story had inconsistencies. Friends said Bonnie had confided fears about him, and there was that eerie statement from young Aaron. Yet prosecutors felt it insufficient to secure an indictment. Coleman remembered frustration. "We knew something was off, but you can't take a gut feeling into court." The 1990s ended and the 2000s arrived, with new forensic methods. Investigators revisited evidence, hoping improved DNA analysis might help, but because Bonnie's body was not found, DNA testing on items like her purse or car proved inconclusive. Time and again, they faced dead ends. Detective James Franklin, who joined the team in the early 2000s, explained, "Cold cases haunt you. You replay them in your mind. You think, did I miss something?" Still, the case lingered on official and unofficial lists of unsolved mysteries. Periodic media coverage would resurface every time a missing persons database turned up a new Jane Doe, but nothing matched Bonnie. Then came the extraordinary break in 2014. Aaron Fraser's backyard discovery in July of that year transformed the investigation overnight. Investigators rushed to the scene, cordoning off the property. The forensic team used shovels, trowels, and fine mesh screens to sift through the soil. Ground-penetrating radar identified anomalies in the earth. Technicians found bone fragments and personal effects that belonged to Bonnie. They analyzed the soil, discovering layers consistent with a hurried burial. The medical examiner's office identified the remains through dental records and partial DNA testing. The conclusion? Bonnie Haim had been murdered and concealed in her own backyard. Armed with this evidence, investigators now had a solid foundation to reopen the case. They conducted new interviews. Some witnesses, older and more reflective, provided details they had withheld years earlier, fearing involvement in a murder trial. One former friend recalled seeing Michael late that night in 1993, sweating and agitated, as though he had been digging or lifting something heavy. Another remembered him making odd comments about Bonnie leaving him for someone else. Piecing these testimonies together created a richer narrative of what likely happened that night. Modern tools also helped tie ballistic evidence from the scene to a gun Michael once owned. Though the original weapon was never recovered, records indicated he purchased a firearm in late 1992. An FBI ballistic analyst testified during trial that fragments found near the remains were consistent with ammunition used in a gun model Michael favored. Combined with Michael's changing stories over the years, first that Bonnie left voluntarily, later that he had no idea what happened, the investigative picture was clear enough for prosecutors to act. Public reaction was strong. After 2 decades, the mention of Bonnie Haim's name resurrected local fears and rekindled old sympathies. Local news stations ran special segments, reviewing archival footage and previous interviews. The case benefited from a surge of interest in true crime media, with blogs and podcasts dissecting every known detail. The community's response was passionate. Some people held candlelight vigils near the old home. Others posted about the case on social media, sharing clipped newspaper articles from the 1990s. Online forums debated theories about Michael's motive. This public re-engagement offered investigators fresh tips, though most were speculative. Still, public pressure and media attention ensured that no stone would remain unturned this time. When the case finally reached trial in April 2019, prosecutors presented a damning timeline and physical evidence. Michael's lawyers struggled to cast doubt on the forensic findings. They attempted to discredit witnesses by pointing to faded memories. Yet the jury saw through these tactics. The careful reconstruction of the crime scene, the forensic science behind identifying old remains, and Aaron Fraser's courageous testimony built a strong case. After deliberations, the verdict was clear. Michael Haim was guilty of murdering Bonnie. In August 2019, he received a life sentence, bringing some measure of closure to a mystery that had haunted Jacksonville for over 20 years. Throughout the long course of the investigation, several suspects had come to the attention of authorities, though few drew serious scrutiny. From the start, Michael Haim was the prime suspect. He was Bonnie's husband, the last person to see her alive, and the one who reported her missing under suspicious circumstances. His inconsistent accounts and questionable behavior, such as failing to join early searches and offering limited cooperation, focused the investigation squarely on him. Yet without a body or physical evidence, he remained a person of interest rather than a charged suspect for decades. A second line of inquiry considered the possibility of a stranger abduction. Bonnie's abandoned car near the airport suggested a scenario where an unknown assailant took advantage of a vulnerable woman seeking escape. Some officers theorized a random predator might have coerced Bonnie into her vehicle, driven away, and killed her. This theory never held substantial weight due to lack of any corroborating evidence. No suspicious individuals were seen nearby, no forced entry was noted, and Bonnie's personal items remained neatly staged rather than scattered in a chaotic struggle. The third theory centered around business associates, given Bonnie's employment at her family's company. Investigators briefly examined if workplace conflicts or financial disputes played a role, yet her colleagues described Bonnie as well-liked and not involved in any contentious relationships. Her workplace was stable and supportive. It provided no leads. In time, all roads led back to Michael. Although he professed innocence, the cumulative circumstantial evidence was damning. The only serious challenge was proving murder without Bonnie's body, and once her remains were discovered, his guilt became overwhelmingly apparent. Forensic evidence from the excavation site linked him indirectly to the burial, and witnesses described ongoing marital tension. No other suspect possessed both motive and opportunity. Controversy did surface regarding the initial investigation. Some critics argued that the police could have done more in 1993, collected better DNA samples, scrutinized Michael's timeline more aggressively, or searched the property with ground-penetrating radar when it first became suspicious. Detective Hinson, reflecting in retirement, admitted, "We were constrained by technology and by the standards of the era." Another controversial aspect was the reliance on a toddler's statement. Although not admitted as direct evidence, Aaron's childhood words cast a long shadow. Some felt more weight should have been placed on them early on, while others insisted it was unfair to rely on a child's memory. Ultimately, these controversies faded as the final verdict affirmed the investigation and the value of patience in criminal justice. Decades later, the Bonnie Haim case continues to see modern developments. Even after Michael's conviction in 2019, legal teams reviewed every piece of evidence to ensure no appeals could undermine the verdict. Advances in DNA analysis prompted forensic experts to re-examine skeletal remains and items buried with Bonnie for any lingering mysteries, such as whether additional traces of Michael's clothing fibers or hair could be definitively identified. As of the early 2020s, no new suspects emerged. The finality of the trial and sentencing left little room for alternative theories. Instead, modern analysis focused on refining the timeline and cause of death. Analysts used digital 3D reconstruction tools on Bonnie's skull fragments to understand the trajectory of the bullet. This cutting-edge technology, unavailable in the 1990s, confirmed the shot was fired at close range. Investigators and prosecutors collaborated with forensic psychologists to present the case as a teaching example in police training seminars, illustrating how patience, persistence, and evolving technology can solve even the coldest of cold cases. Additionally, renewed interest in older missing person cases prompted law enforcement agencies to apply lessons learned from the Haim case. The Florida Department of Law Enforcement integrated new protocols for immediate property searches and advanced radar usage in suspicious missing person scenarios. While these modern developments may not bring Bonnie back or change the outcome for Michael Haim, they enrich the law enforcement toolbox for future investigations, potentially helping solve other decades-old crimes. Public fascination with this case also influenced the creation of specialized DNA databases and the expansion of public tip lines. Some people wondered if other families with missing loved ones might see similar breakthroughs through persistent forensic analysis. The legacy of Bonnie Haim's murder and the 2014 backyard discovery continues to shape conversations in forensic science forums. It serves as a reminder that sometimes the key to solving a mystery lies just beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment and the right technology to emerge. The Bonnie Haim case holds a noteworthy place in cultural memory. Several true crime books and documentaries have explored it as a powerful narrative of love turned lethal and secrets buried in plain sight. While no major Hollywood film has yet been made, a handful of independent documentaries and podcasts dive deep into the story, drawing an audience fascinated by long-lost mysteries and final reckonings. Each retelling highlights the slow burn of suspicion and the dramatic twists of a son discovering his mother's remains in his childhood backyard. Law enforcement training has evolved in part due to this case. Departments now emphasize the importance of thoroughly searching homes and properties, rather than relying solely on statements of next of kin. The cultural impact extends to the public's awareness of domestic violence indicators. Bonnie's case underscores how silent suffering within a marriage can escalate into something unimaginable. Over time, this story has woven itself into the tapestry of true crime lore, becoming an example that surfaces in discussions about how missing person cases are handled. True crime enthusiasts often point to it as proof that no secret is truly safe from discovery. The emotional resonance comes from its deeply human elements: a young mother lost, a child robbed of memories, and a community that watched helplessly. Without further ado, I approach Neil with his remarks. Welcome, Neil. In today's world, the Haim case is frequently cited in investigative journalism classrooms, crime analysis seminars, and online forums where amateur sleuths trade theories. Its legacy endures because it resonates on multiple levels. It reminds us that everyday family homes can hold dark secrets, that killers can evade justice for decades, and that advancements in forensic science can rewrite endings long believed to be fixed. The continuing public interest ensures that Bonnie Haim's name will not fade from the annals of true crime history. As we step back to reflect on this extraordinary case, several key points stand out. The Bonnie Haim story reminds us that even when time seems to erase the trail of a killer, persistence, evolving forensic techniques, and the unwavering determination of loved ones can finally bring truth to light. Her disappearance in 1993 baffled investigators, and the world watched as decades passed without closure. The shocking discovery of her remains by her own son in 2014 reignited interest and transformed a cold case into a solvable crime. By 2019, a Florida courtroom heard the voices of witnesses who had waited years to speak. Michael Haim's conviction closed a chapter that began with heartbreak and ended in justice. Education advocates, who have conducted more than 20 interviews with her mother, often turn to the voices of witnesses who had waited years to speak. The implications are profound. Cases once considered unsolvable can sometimes be cracked open by unforeseen events or technological breakthroughs. Bonnie's story illustrates that determined families, dedicated investigators, and improved forensic methods can overcome even the most daunting obstacles. If there is a lesson to be gleaned, it is that the truth, no matter how deeply buried, can still surface when the right circumstances align. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more true crime stories as we continue to examine cases that challenge our understanding of human nature and the pursuit of justice. We encourage you to share your thoughts in the comments below. What aspects of the Bonnie Haim case most intrigue you? Are there other cold cases you'd like us to revisit? Let us know. And if this story piques your interest, you might want to explore other long-term missing person cases, such as the decades-old mystery of Kristen Smart or the disappearance of Asha Degree. Each unresolved story stands as a testament to the complex tapestry of human behavior and the tireless efforts of those who strive to uncover the truth.